Hello, everyone, and welcome to this broadcast. Mark DeJesus here. Looking forward to sharing on today's subject. It's something that's going to specifically align with the battle and journey of working through OCD issues. But man, I can't help but think we all could use a dose of understanding what it means to face our control issues. And so I'm going to hit in a bunch of different areas. We're going to try to keep this within the realm of what does it look like in your battle in overcoming and healing through OCD issues. We all have to face this issue of control. So if you have OCD, you're going to realize there are control factors that you have in your life. And these control factors need to be faced and worked through. Again, it's got to be in the love of God. It's got to be in His grace. It's got to be in knowing you're safe to face these issues and face these areas. So I have been covering the distortions, 7 distortions. And again, if you're a person that's working through OCD, I want to encourage you, take the long view in mind. Don't look for just the quick fix. And how do I just get through this quickly and just fix this thing? If you're really going to see long-term fruit, you have to take the long-term view in mind. And I want to encourage you to allow yourself in the graciousness and kindness of God to work through some of these distortions. Again, I have a mailing list that I specifically send these updates out to. It also has some automated emails sent to you where I can receive some feedback on what you're going through. markdejesus.com/OCD help. But these 7 distortions, and I'm on number 6 in this one, and I look forward to covering number 7 because the difficulty with emotions is a big, big one. But you're going to have to realize control is a big part of OCD. And I think it's important to know that control goes into controlling your thoughts, this incessant need to get all your thoughts controlled. But I also find that it can really dig into a lot of other areas as well, too. It can get into how we control relationships. It can get into this incessant need to control our environment, the environment that we're in, right? And this feeling of like our worst nightmares, feeling out of control. And so if you have OCD, there will be a part of your journey that you're going to need to recognize control factors that you have in your life. And the first area that this control kicks up in is the need to control your thoughts. There's this inward driving pressure, and it's driven by fear to make sure that your thoughts line up correctly, to make sure they are, quote, just right. And that's driven by perfectionism. And you're going to need to get back to the distortion number 1 of the perfectionistic issues that happen in your life. Because when this need for control comes in to make sure that our thoughts are just right, what happens is we avoid anything that will trigger these unwanted thoughts. And I relate to this a lot. I would, in many cases, in many circumstances, if there's a certain thought pattern that I have that created this disturbance, then I would avoid anything that had to do with that because I was afraid of the trigger that it would bring about. And it has to do with this lineup, these 7 distortions that kick in. You know, the distorted interpretation, and I got to do something about this because if I don't, and the heavy responsibility, and then the sense of control that kicks in, I've got to maintain this control. And all control issues are rooted in fear, and the fear fuels a protective mechanism. I've got to protect myself. It creates hypervigilance. It can create a on guard kind of fight or flight that we're engaged in a lot, and it doesn't let us relax in our own skin because we feel this incessant need to control and to protect ourselves. And so this control creates a pressure. You have this internal pressure, and your thought life doesn't flourish under pressure. Okay? You have to understand that. Your thought life does not flourish under pressure. Your thought life is meant to flourish under love, freedom of learning. It's not black and white where like you arrive and fix it. It's allowing yourself to learn. And a big passage of scripture I want to encourage is where Jesus said, "Come to me, all you are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest." I've talked about this in other broadcasts. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. There's a gentleness that God offers us. And so to the OCD sufferer and your control issues, you're going to have to learn and allow yourself in a journey of what it means to enter into the gentleness and the rest of God. Because if you notice, all your OCD issues ramp up fear, ramp up control, and they ramp up a survival response towards a God that is dangerous and will punish you at any moment. That's kind of the pathway. And I know a lot of people that are coming to my materials on OCD, they have religious OCD, scrupulosity. And I'm going to get more into that. I'm going to get more into that specifically. And if you'll notice in these broadcasts, I'm not just doing a quick little broadcast and leaving. I want to talk relationally from my heart to your heart, because I want to slow your heart down, slow your mind down to go, this is a journey that we're going to go on and learning what it means to be loved, to understand safety, to learn to let go of control step by step. And God's patient with you in the process. That's what's great about this whole thing, is that God is patient with us as we're working through. He knows we have control issues. He knows we're trying to control all our thoughts. He knows that we're trying to control our environment so that we don't have to face any of our fears, right? Because that's what control does. I need these things to be just right, because if not, I'm out of control and I won't know how to face these things that threaten me. And fear's greatest power is the threat that it brings, because fear is a terrorist. Now, what does a terrorist do? A terrorist's greatest power is the threat. It's not just what could happen, it's the threat of it that leaves people in places of anxiety, unrest, and then the feeling the need to control. Once we face the fear, once we step up to it and go, wait a second, you're powerless, then it starts to dismantle. I know easier said than done. But that's the reality. The fear comes out of those places we don't feel safe. So fear ramps up, and fear magnifies a sense of control. And then there's also an aspect too where we can begin to control our relationships. And I noticed this in my life where I needed to control certain factors relationally in order to feel safe. And I had to learn to let go on all three levels. I had to learn to let go first in my inner thought world of this incessant need to make sure I control everything out of fear. I had to secondly go, I need to day by day learn to release how my day goes, my environment, and be okay when, and learn to be okay when I don't feel okay. Learn to embrace that it's all right, but also to learn to not give in to some of the control factors that I will feed relationally. So those three areas are important, okay? So to kind of summarize this, control becomes the way someone attempts to feel safe. Safety is your issue, and safety is connected to what love means. Those who recognize they have control issues have to become aware of their need for safety. But their definition of safety has been built into a sense of control. I must control my thoughts, I must control my environment, and possibly even control in relationships. So let's talk about control and thoughts. Those with OCD feel a tremendous pressure to control their thought world. If we were to examine, kind of look into your thought patterns, we would see the heavy standard that thoughts need to be flawless. You got to make sure your thoughts are right. And, oh, look at this one. That one's not right. Look at this one. That one's off. Look at this one over here. Any sign of a flaw is a place of potential obsession. It's fueled by perfectionism. It's a standard that can never satisfy. So it impacts everything. How you read the Bible, it impacts how you pray, it impacts those certain areas of thoughts. That inward standard of needing to feel that things need to be just right. And so the control mechanism kicks into play in order to hold that needed feeling of control. The obsession ramps up, the person doesn't feel at peace or safe, so they develop a compulsion. It's some thinking pattern, acting pattern, relating pattern, some type of habit, some type of ritual that you go into to try to relieve you of your obsession. But the compulsion is coming, it actually ramps up your control issues and it inflames them. And so the initial lie an OCD sufferer can believe is, listen to this, the initial lie is that you can completely control the thoughts that enter your mind. That's an initial lie of control. Anything unwanted, you must interrupt it immediately, preemptively, before it's even there. Make sure you're all right? So now you're in this tension, pressure, and God's not a God of pressure. He wants to relieve you of that pressure. So any inappropriate, unwanted, or immoral thought or thought that conflicts with your value systems is absolutely unacceptable, and you attack it with force. And so I had to realize one of my early layers of healing was realizing I had a great deal of fear, anxiety that drove my life. So what happens is you become afraid of the thought. So it leads you to avoid the subject or hurry to do something that will alleviate it. That anxiety comes in, and that anxiety partners with control issues. Then we become afraid. We're so afraid of it, right? Because we think if we act, we think we're going to act on the thought. Now, why do we think we're going to act on the thought? Because the visual and the emotion of the thought is so strong. So because it's so vivid, we become confused. So control comes in and goes, I never want to feel anything close to that. So we develop this intense resistance to the thoughts, which actually make them grow worse. Intrusive thoughts gain power when you're afraid of them. Intrusive thoughts gain power when you're afraid of them. Whatever OCD subject comes to you and threatens you, if you're afraid of it, it increases its power. And you'll respond out of that fear in either fight or flight. And often fight is get that thought out, get that thought out, get that thought out. I got to fix this, I got to fix this. God help me, God help me. God. Intense pressure. Or flight, which is got to get away from it as much as possible. Avoid. And the control mechanism is in the midst of that. And control is a myth because we're not in control of the world. We're not in control of a whole lot. And I'm going to get to, there's one thing that you can be in control of, and I'll get to that in just a second. But this fear, and people say, well, practically, how do you deal with these thoughts? Well, we have to disempower the fear of it. If I'm afraid of a thought, it will empower me. It will empower it. If I'm no longer afraid of it, and that takes, some layers of work, of recognizing this thought is just a thought. This thought doesn't have to mean anything. This thought doesn't mean something about my character or something that it's just a thought that's trying to attach to me, but I don't have to let it attach to me. And part of it is I see you, not afraid of you. If you're not afraid of it, you can notice it, and then it doesn't grow anymore. Try to suppress it, the OCD thought gets more intensified. Try to avoid it in every way, shape, and form, and gains power. Get away, get away, get away, and inflames the fear. Many will say, just stop thinking that way, right? I used to play this funny video when I would do conferences and host seminars on some of these subjects. I would play the video. I don't know if you can find it anymore. It's probably in an old format. I think it was off of Mad TV as a Bob Newhart skit. And he had this lady who'd come in and she'd had some intrusive thoughts. And he's like, okay, you ready? I'm going to give you the prescription. And he just yells at her. And he goes, stop it! Stop it! Right? And it's funny. And I use it as a way for the audience I'm teaching to just kind of laugh at themselves. Like, listen, you got to have a sense of humor in this, or else you're going to take yourself so seriously in the fear, right? But that intensity, OCD sufferers often respond with that, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, which from a Christian understanding, here's what you need to know. That follows under the mindset of the law. Paul, what he said, the law came about through what? sin came about, law brought out sin. It really magnified it because it said, thou shalt not. So the moment thou shalt not was introduced, it introduced sin. There you go. There's sin. But it didn't empower you to overcome it. It made you more focused on it and more focused on trying to avoid it. And the harder you tried, the greater you failed. That's why we needed Christ. And I find the majority of OCD sufferers I interact with, whether email, coaching, or just interacting with, they have a law-based mindset, a rule-based mindset, so strict and so intense, it gets inflamed by the law. So when they read the Bible, they actually read the Bible with a law lens. And if you do, it's a rough ride. Because the Bible is meant to be read in covenant. It's meant to be read relationally. And relationship is messy. It's a journey. It's day to day. It's not this black and white, check off the box, follow the rule, fix kind of things. It's relational. It becomes very difficult for an OCD mind because their upbringing in the faith is actually law-based. I've yet to this day ever met an OCD sufferer that has a real heart connection with love and grace because that's their battle. That's their struggle. So if I tell you, don't think the color green, don't think the color green. Whatever you do, do not think about the color green. What are you going to think about? You're going to see green. You're going to see green. You're going to see green grass. You're going to think about a green light. You're going to think about a green tree, right? So don't think. And other people saying, just stop thinking that way. A lot of times they don't understand this battle and they don't understand their own battles because even people who don't have OCD need to learn how to detox the work of law-based thinking in their life. So control's a myth. Now, we try to have a sense of control. There is a sense of certainty that we want to have in our life. I talked about that in one of the distortions. But OCD sufferers, their control issues get ramped up inside. And anything that disrupts that sense of control, they get triggered into stress, anxiety, and even anger issues can come up. You kind of get an OCD person out of their lane, and that anger kicks up because they're very disrupted, because their own internal world is very restricted, right? So here's some of the take home. The truth is you cannot control what thoughts arrive to you. I found it so helpful to release my heart from the burden of thinking I can control what enters. Now, over time, here's what I can control. I can control where I point my compass. So that means where I'm setting my compass and where I'm heading. That's where decision comes into play. Now, it becomes, and I'll talk about this in the next episode, it becomes difficult because as an OCD sufferer, you make a choice to step in a direction, but your feelings don't align with it. Your feelings contradict it. So then it causes you to feel like, well, where I'm heading is the wrong direction. So then we kind of fall to the feelings, and then we wait for the feelings to line up, and we don't realize that when your feelings are struggling to line up, this is where you need to lead your heart. There's a big conflict in Christianity of is the heart evil or is the heart good? There's the argument of your heart is deceptively wicked and deceitful above all things. Who can know it? Then there's the scripture of God giving you a new heart. So you don't have that wicked heart. You have a heart that is from me. You have a new one, right? And people are fighting back and forth and arguing. And I'm like, you know what? No one's getting helped and transformed through this arguing. But here's what I've discovered in the midst of it. I've discovered I have the ability given by God to lead my heart. Because if my heart is deceived, I can go, well, I'm making a decision to move towards truth in the best that I can see right now. And that conflict is where the rubber meets the road. Because there's so much uncertainty. There's so much, well, how do I really know? How do I really know? And the mistake is that we want assurance before we take the step. And I found I'm taking the step on the best I know right now with that tension, with that conflict. So I learned that. I learned to begin to practice living in that tension. Anxiety ramping up, guilt, feeling conflicted. And I'm like, because I came to terms with seeing where this whole OCD pathway led me. And that's really, in my opinion, where change is only going to come about. When you see that your pattern, people write to me and say, for 10 years, I've been wondering if I'm saved. For 20 years, I've been so you have to look and go, this whole pathway is not serving me. So why do I keep going back to it? Well, there's all these reasons I'm giving out, but that led me to go, the way I relate, I see it over and over again. The way I'm doing relationships is dysfunctional. I need a whole overhaul, not a tweak. It's not this one little area. I need a whole overhaul in how I process the life of my heart, emotions, and how I take steps of action, and how I do this guilt confession thing. Whoa, how I listen to guilt, how I listen to anxiety. Boy, look at all these areas, right? But it all led me back to learning to be loved in the love of God and realizing that in the steps I take, that the pressure of heaven isn't over me in every single step I take. And it caused me to deal with my control issues. So you can't control the thoughts you arrive, but you can make a decision on your learning a healthy response plan. And that involves kindness. It involves gentle redirection. Oh my goodness, there's this thought. Am I saved or am I not saved? Oh my goodness, am I going to get contaminated, get a disease? Oh my, do I need guilt? I got to confess this. I got to confess this to somebody. Or, maybe this thought means I'm a sexual deviant, or maybe gentle redirection. Kindness. Brothers and sisters, we got to learn to be kind to ourselves. That takes time, takes practice. And the discipline is learning to gently redirect ourselves from the obsessive subject into new subjects. And people say, well, what's the new subject? What's the new subject? Well, that you're loved. But sometimes it means gentle redirection in paying attention to who's in front of you and have a heart-to-heart conversation. And redirect yourself from the subject you're fussing over into, you know what, I'm going to listen to the person in front of me, and I'm going to have a talk with them, and I'm going to exchange. And that thing might be barking over here, but I'm going to learn to talk to the person in front of me. It may be just learning to redirect yourself to a new subject. It may be gently redirecting yourself to, I'm just going to keep learning what it means to love myself in the midst of this, to connect to it. Man, I don't know what love is, but I want to learn. Right? That's not controlling redirection. Get away. Got to think over here. Listen to my language. Gentle redirection to new pathways. And God's patient with you in that process. Now, the core need in a control situation, any kind of control issue, is safety. How do you feel safe? And so I had to change my definition of safety. It's not in getting my thoughts just right. It's relearning safety altogether. Jesus never taught us we will have safety by this all being just right, all our thoughts being just right, our environment being just right, our circumstances being right, our people being just right. The safety is found in connection to Him in the midst of all that we struggle with. Right? Safety starts with you learning to be safe with yourself. So you have some crazy thoughts that come your way. What's your response? Is it, man, you can't get it together? Is it, what's wrong with you? Because I hear this over and over again, a repeated pattern of massive harshness. No one's harder on you than you are. No one. There's not even a second place that's even close. You are incredibly hard on yourself. And so, of course, every thought that comes to you that is unwanted, that's intrusive, that was against your value system, is met with controlling hostility. Not gentleness, not kindness, animosity. And some of that then trickles over even into our relationship patterns. Because control can create rigidity around our relationships, right? The timing patterns, lifestyle patterns rooted in control can create unhealthy patterns of relating. Control in a relationship can even move into like codependency. You need someone to be a certain way in order to be better and be relieved of your anxiety. But when you're in a relationship where you try to control someone, you're not going to have a real relationship. You may have an image of one. And a lot of times we control people because we don't know how to relate vulnerably. We don't know how to work through conflict resolution. We don't know how to relate to people in healthy ways. What we really need to do in our control issues is get to the struggles of the heart. Because it's my firm conviction underneath all your symptoms of OCD is a heart crying out for love, crying out for healing, crying out for nurture. But OCD distracts us. We're lost in all these subjects we can't see. Our heart needs love. The love of the Father demonstrated through the work of Christ. Where love is absent, fear takes over. And with fear, control issues are going to arise. When we're going through a hard time, feelings of uncertainty, or trying to find your way, we cope by trying to control. Let me get my thoughts just right, people and situations. And I noticed that when OCD issues would ramp up more intensely, it actually revealed I was going through things of the heart, transitions in life, things in my life I was processing. These markers become times where the control ramps up. You and your wife or you and your husband are expecting a baby. And all of a sudden you find you're more obsessive than normal. Or maybe you just had a baby. Or maybe you just got married. You're leaving college. You got kicked out of the house. You left your parents' home. All these transition points become these heavy turns, and we weren't equipped in love and grace. So in the heavy turns, the control issues ramp up to try to get our need of safety. And so what's the biggest fear? The biggest fear is being out of control is the worst nightmare ever. Even though when we truly learn to let go of control in layers, we realize we're not in control. And it can actually be one of the most freeing experiences in our life. Now, unfortunately, people who have control issues often don't admit they have control issues. And a lot of these control battles, they come out of not feeling safe. And for many of you, there's deep wounds in your upbringing that weren't safe. You were not tutored and equipped in the nurturing power of love. There's trauma in your life that then creates these imprint markers of greater lack of safety. And I'll tell you that one of the biggest monsters that leaves people deeply empty and open and vulnerable is the monster of neglect. Because when you weren't given what you needed in equipping, not only are you empty and vulnerable to attack, you don't even know what you're looking for when it comes to healing because you have no reference. So if you weren't loved, for example, in nurture, to comfort you when you were wounded and when you're struggling, you're told maybe just get over it, what's the matter with you, just be better, or just ignored completely when you're in pain, you're left to your own thoughts. And you're really left to thoughts that the enemy's going to hit you with. You got to do life on your own. You got to take matters into your own hands. No one's going to be there for you. And you're just a kid. You don't even realize that you got to think these thoughts. And many times OCD sufferers at first will say to me, oh, no, my upbringing was good. I was raised in church. Then over time, I'm like, tell me about your church life. Tell me about your faith. And it takes a while, but then we get into, these rules and these things. And I actually was never, and I wasn't even hugged. And I wasn't even told I was loved, or I wasn't even, I'm like, okay, Now we're seeing, right? Because now why does it take so long to often recognize these things? Because we weren't given it neglect, and B, so now we don't know what we're looking for. Right? So you're deficient in that certain emotional nutrient, struggling, but you don't even know you need it. Right? So ask yourself the question, where was I not equipped in love? I know you want to focus on fixing the OCD issue, and I'm always going to gently redirect you to the deeper problems. What was it like for you to know love, nurture, to be equipped in those areas? Paul the Apostle said it itself. He said, without love, everything's just a bunch of noise. Am I saved or am I not saved? Do I need to repent? What do I do? What do I do to face this? Without love, it's just a bunch of noise. Trying to strive and what we need is love to settle your hearts, to heal your hearts. What is your reference for loving nurture? Well, we can see how much we access love by how we look at our struggles, how we respond to our struggles. And for example, people who struggle with their salvation, it's like a form of self-abuse that you scream at yourself that this battle is because I'm not saved, We get in this loop, feedback loop of self-punishment. Just whipping yourself with these heavy thoughts. Well, it's because I'm not, we translate in all these very, very harsh interpretations. So sometimes we have to ask ourselves, what are we afraid of if we face our fears and lose that sense of control? Maybe you need to start with, what are the sayings that you say to yourself when you feel out of control? Because for me, my control issues were self-protection. I've got to create this safe fortress, and I'm going to engage these areas of self-protection. Right? We often never want anything to hurt, to hurt us, so we let this control mechanism take over. And underneath the control is our fear. And underneath the control is shame. Because it says, I won't feel safe, and then this will happen, and then I won't be loved. I won't be accepted. I'll be rejected. I'll be removed. It's all shame language. Accusatory, condemning, unloving kind of language. Right? Or maybe your anger kicks up when you feel that loss of control. So what is the fear saying underneath it? If I have this thought, it means I'm unclean. Well, let's face it. Because part of letting go our control issues is we see the thought, we notice it, but we're not going to try to engage this control mechanism based in fear anymore. We notice it, it's there, but we're not going to feed it. And people go, oh my goodness, that's impossible. It's not. It just seems like it at first. I noticed this thought. I'm anxious up to here right now, but I don't need to add to it to make it worse. I notice it's there because love is here. And I'm learning to let love cast out fear. I don't need to be afraid of this thought. So I'm going to gently redirect myself because I don't have to fuss, fix, or ramp up this thought. I notice, and you can just float right on by. And I'm going to redirect myself back to a new definition of safety, which is I'm loved even though there's this stuff going on. I'm learning to refocus my attention on what it means to truly be loved. And so I want to encourage the driving force of fear to be exposed in a loving way. Looking at some of your comments, that what fear has done in your life. And I'm telling you, I know what it's like on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the worst. Fear, you feel like you're going to die. I know what it's like to be in 11. I know what it's like to be in that kind of place for a while. I know what it's like to not know where this is going to go. And this is going to stay forever. And this, many of you, that's what comes to you. This is going to stay forever. It's a lie. It's all a lie. But you're learning to redevelop your definition of safety. And safety is only found in the love of God. And there'd be maybe some resources that are a help to you. One of them that is helpful to me was learning about fear and learning how to separate out the voice of fear. Because fear messes up this whole thing. It doesn't allow us to learn anxiety, the stress, the pressure that increases. And maybe you need to just get some clarification on recognizing, oh, I've been listening to fear all day. Because fear will always do a work of lying. It's always smoke and mirrors. It will always lead you into further deception. And just recognize, I will not be loved once I fix my thoughts. I'm loved right now. I'm loved right now where I'm at. And so, do you know what happens when you take a step, you face your fears, you take a step in a new direction? You know what you're building? You're building trust. And trust is one step at a time. I'm learning to trust who God is in me. I'm learning to trust that I can take a step forward. I'm learning to not be an enemy to myself. I'm learning to take a step forward and going, you know what? I'm going to leave that pattern behind me. And I'm going to be kind to myself and move into a new direction, move into a new focus in my life. And I'm going to learn to let go of control because I don't have control. All I have is a choice and decision control to just set my focus. Here's my compass today. And I set my compass. God is my Father. He loves me. He's with me. And His grace is here. That in my stumbling, in my mistakes, and in my battles, He's here. And that becomes the focus of where we start each step in each day. So I pray this is a blessing to your life, to your journey. I pray it helps you to fruitfully address areas of your life that need help, that need overcoming. And I pray that it helps you to process what you're battling in fruitful and helpful ways. So many blessings to you all. Pray you have a great rest of the day. If this has been a blessing to your life, consider a one-time donation, become a regular subscriber, and that will help me to be able to continue to put out materials and resources that'll encourage your life and your journey. Many blessings to you all, and I look forward to seeing you in future broadcasts. Take care now.